to start this message off with that commercial because I think that the core message of that commercial is actually the same core message that John is trying to send. The root or the core message of that commercial is basically that this, Planet Fitness, is not that. And they do a really great job in that commercial of kind of demonstrating that. They use humor to kind of show how this culture of the gym culture is not what Planet Fitness is all about. In fact, they say it explicitly in the end, we're not a gym, we're Planet Fitness. And I love how they even made up verbiage to kind of explain what's going on. They use the word gym-timidation. I love that word because you don't have to know what it means to know what it means, you know what I mean? And thank you for people who laughed at that. Anyway. Gym timidation is just like, okay, the guy who's like slamming the weights, like, oh, I'm so strong, and you're standing there like, oh, you're too aggressive for me. I'm going to roll around on the exercise ball thing. It's for your abs, I think. And they use word like the word lunk, I think, is hilarious. I've never heard that word before these commercials, but the idea of like just the sound of that word lunk, that just totally describes what we saw in that commercial. They did a great job of sending this message that this, Planet Fitness, is not that. It's exactly, if I could sum up what John is trying to say in the book of 1 John, that we're going to spend 10 weeks in total. This is week number 2. If I could sum up the message that John is trying to send, it's the same thing, that this is not that. And if you've ever read 1 John, then you know that there's a couple things that he's primarily concerned with. One of those is false teachers or antichrists, as he calls them. These are people who have come into his church, come into his flock, who are teaching something different than what he's teaching. And we'll see as the book unfolds, they're saying all these things about Jesus, and John's response to that is, in the first couple verses, he says, hey, I was there, I saw him. I put my hands on him, I touched him, I walked with him. I know who Jesus is. Okay, and he's basically saying this Christianity is not that. It's not what they're saying. The other thing that he's really concerned about is love. He talks over and over and over about how if you're in the light, you are going to live a life that is loving. And if you're in hate, then he even says in chapter 3, he says, you abide in death. He uses very strong language to show that this is not that. That if you are a Christian and you want to go around hating other Christians, that's okay, but you need to understand that this Christianity is not that. He's also, the other thing that he does in this book a lot is he encourages his flock. He talks over and over about how they have already overcome the persecution that they're facing. He talks a lot how their faith is triumphant. He talks about how their faith is not the kind of faith that is defeated, that will lose. They're winners. And so what he's saying is this Christianity is not that. It's not the kind of faith that loses. You've already overcome. And so John over and over is constantly sending this message that this is not that. And over the next 9 weeks or so, we're going to kind of look at different topics or different subjects that John brings up. And we're going to see kind of this same message that this is not that. And the first topic that he tackles is belonging, which I just love that he chose to do that first. Because it almost matters the most. Because here's the thing, I don't know if you have ever, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation in which you didn't belong. I don't know if you've ever been like to maybe a different country where, there's some obvious signs that you don't belong, like you don't speak the language. But there's also like these subtle signs that you don't belong, like you don't know how to use the bathroom in different cultures. Has anybody ever been to Asia? It's just different. Google it. Don't Google it. Anyway. My sister is working on a Native American reservation, and she does like social work kind of thing there. And she told me the story this week about how the elders, you're supposed to give the village elders, the tribal elders, respect. And so the way that they show that in that culture is they don't look them in the eye. And so she just told me the story about how she broke that rule over and over and over again until somebody said, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "What?" She didn't even know. There's these sort of unwritten rules that kind of go to show that we don't belong. When I was young, when I was in elementary school, I was the fat kid. I struggled with my weight. Nowadays it's kind of an active choice. I just love Taco Bell too much. My body just craves carcinogens. Um, anyway. Back then, it was just kind of like, that was just my life. And I remember, going through elementary school and really, being made fun of, and that was kind of it. And I never really felt like I belonged. And if you've ever been in that situation, and statistically, there's only a few people who belong in, and there's many who don't belong in. So statistically, if you're sitting here today, chances are that you were on the outside of something at some point. And when you live on the outside, when you don't belong for an extended period of time, it gives you this unique perspective. You get to see who belongs, how they got to belong, and how they got kicked out if they did get kicked out. If you spend a long time, you can kind of see how people just kind of work their way in, and how they stay in, and then how they kind of leave. The world has a way that it works. There's sort of a system of belonging. And this is kind of how it starts. Belonging begins when you're accepted by a leader, right, or the leaders. So every group has the most popular kid, right, or has a group of the most popular kids. Every group has, and maybe this is at your work, you have a rock star coworker who's he can sell anything. And anything that the higher-ups give him to do, he does it so well that everybody's like, man, I just wish I could be like that guy. And at the conventions and in the office, everybody is trying to suck up to this guy because if he says that they're in, if he accepts them, then their position on the inside is solidified. So belonging in the world system begins when the leader lets you in. I never saw this more clear than when I was younger. My dad had signed me up for a YMCA basketball. And very first practice, they had just kind of meshed all these kids together who didn't know each other. And so I walked in, I had no idea who these guys are, but throughout the course of the practice, one guy showed that he was very good at basketball, and then there was some of us who were and then there was me who was when's snack time? Anyway. So this one kid, what was amazing about that was the rest of the season, all the little boys on this team spent their time sucking up to the guy who was really good at basketball. And I remember this one time, this one kid came up to him and he said, "Hey, do you like Star Wars? I just watched Star Wars last night. It was the coolest thing in the whole world that I saw. And I love this character, Boba Fett." And the kid interrupted him. He said, "I really hate Star Wars." And the kid said, "Oh yeah, me too." It was just so painfully obvious that he was trying to fit in, and his strategy to fit in was to go to the leader and try and get him to accept him. So that's how beginning belongs in the world system. You're accepted by the leader or the leaders. By the way, we see this in Jesus' life all the time. Not all the time. Initially, when he started his ministry, the Pharisees were constantly sending people to check him out. The leaders of the time were kind of just is this guy okay? Is he not okay? They decided he wasn't okay, and then they killed him. Anyway, sorry to ruin the end. He rose again. Anyway, so belonging begins when the leaders let you in. Then, number two is you can stay belonging. You can stay in as long as you don't sin, right? You're in as long as you don't sin. Now, I know that's a Christian word, but every single subculture, every single group has a list of unwritten rules or a list of standards, and if you don't live up to the standard or you break the rule, you have sinned. And so they kind of either your position in the group kind of goes down, or they kick you out. You stay in as long as you don't sin. One of the ways that I've seen this the most clearly was when my oldest was born. My wife joined a group on Facebook that was moms, and they were crunchy moms. If you know what that means, you just know what that means. But anyway, so they do things naturally. Like I said, I just got to go to Taco Bell because I need some carcinogens or something. Naturals, whatever. Anyway, chemicals. I love that stuff. So there's a bunch of crunchy moms, and this one mom is on there, and she said, "I've chosen to bottle feed my baby." And the hate that was dumped upon this mom was incredible. Why? Because she broke the rules. Because she didn't live up to their standard. Moms, you've probably seen the commercials that kind of poke fun at mom culture. There's different moms who work, moms who don't work, moms who breastfeed, moms who bottle feed, moms who whatever. This kind of exists. It's a good example of a subculture in which there are rules, and if you break them, you're out. So you're in as long as you don't sin. That's how the world works. You're let in by a leader. You're in as long as you don't sin. And what this system produces is shame. If you can show how other people don't belong or belong less than you belong, then that solidifies your position in the group. Why? Because you're not them. And so what happens is if you have to gain acceptance from the leader and you have to keep their acceptance and you stay in as long as you don't sin, that system sets us up for failure, right? Because we're not perfect. We make mistakes. And the best strategy when you sin, the best strategy to stay in is to show that somebody else belongs less than you do. And so what they'll do is they'll attack the people who don't belong. And the reason for that is because it solidifies their position in the group. That's kind of how the world works. It begins with the leader accepting you. You stay in as long as you don't sin, and the whole system produces this climate of fear and shame and hate and putting down other people. And I've been using terms like from high school or elementary school and from like mom culture, but my guess is that over 90% of us have had this exact same experience just inside of a church, where maybe you ticked off the leader. Maybe it was the Bible study leader, or maybe it was the pastor. And because you ticked them off, all of a sudden your social status was kicked down a couple notches. Maybe you're even kicked out. Or maybe you've been a part of a system or a group in which you made a mistake. And maybe like your spouse divorced you. Or maybe you got pregnant out of wedlock. Or maybe your kids are just terrible. Just kidding. That was bad when the baby was crying. I had pre said that. You can watch the tape. I said it in last service. Anyway. Or maybe you have you've done something to offend the standard or the rules that are set in place by this group, and so you're kicked down a notch or you're kicked out. Or maybe you've even participated in a system in which it was encouraged that you denigrate or downplay or shame people on the outside. This one time, I was in an early church plant. This was years ago. And, the whole system was set up just exactly this way, that the pastor had kind of all the control, and it was a very small group of people, about 30 people. And, it was a very high emphasis on behavior. And one time, this one guy, who was just a great guy, he had some issues with the leader. And so he told me the issues, and I said, okay, you need to go talk to the leader about that. So he goes and he talks to the leader. The leader calls me and says, hey, I just got the word he uses, poison. I got poison from him. And I was like, I just told him to tell you what his issues were. And he was like, that's not what happened. He hates me. I was like, okay. So then he called this emergency meeting to figure out how to deal with this guy. And at this meeting, it was all decided, and I was a part of this. This is my own sin. It was decided that he needs to be disciplined. And to this day, if I think about all the things I've done in my life and have like the highest level of guilt, that's top 3. Because it was just so terrible. He questioned the leader, and so we kicked him out. But this is how the world works. This is how the system works. This is how oftentimes the church works. Church very often operates on the same rules that the world does. And what John does, what we're going to see today is John offers a different perspective. He offers a different system. It's a system that turns the world system up on its head. It's a system that is so much better. And so what we're going to see is that for John, belonging doesn't begin by being accepted by the leader and trying to ingratiate yourself to him. Belonging begins with an illumination. And then once you belong, you don't stay in if you don't sin. For John, how he sees belonging is you begin a journey from brokenness to wholeness. And that whole system that doesn't produce hate and shame, what it produces is love. So let's dive into it. This is going to be 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. John says this, "This is the message that we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light." Everybody say light. Yes, good job. It's always, it's kind of a risk. Are they going to say it? I don't know. Anyway. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. But if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. Do you see what he said there? If we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship. That means that we belong. That means that we're in. We made it in. And how do you get in? You get in by walking in the light. How do you walk in the light? I think this is a really important question, because the world system would say how you walk in the light is by doing it yourself, by being good, by following all the rules, by getting the leader to like you. But John answers this question very differently. And you actually can see the answer in John. If you're confused, there's actually 4 Johns. He wrote 5 books. It's all one guy. John, the gospel, is earlier in the New Testament, and what we're in is 1 John. But in the Gospel of John, he opens it with these famous words that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. If you skip a few verses, he gets to these very famous words that in him, that is in Jesus, was life, and that life was the light of men. And the light shines into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. For John, belonging doesn't begin by getting the leader to like you. Belonging begins when the leader shines upon you. It begins with an illumination. For John, the system isn't about being good enough for the leader to accept you. It's about a leader who has already accepted you. It's about a leader who shines his light upon you. This is the gospel, that even though that we have done nothing, even our good things don't get us in. What gets us in is his grace and his love. He shines his light upon you. And if you live in this system of the world for a long time, what you'll kind of develop is kind of this personality disorder, right? Like on the inside, you have this voice that is constantly telling you, don't do this, that's what people who don't belong do. Do this because that's what people who do belong do. Act this way, and you have this pressure that you've sort of internalized, and it becomes kind of like this inner monologue that you have that says, act and behave this way so that you can be in. And what that sets up is this system in which we want to belong, and so we work to belong, but we never actually make it. And so we want to belong more, and so we work harder, and so we want more, and we work harder, and it ends up in this system. The system is created that is a very tired, fatigued, angry, fearful, schizophrenic type of spirituality, because on one hand it says, yes, love, but on the other hand it says, yes, work for it. You don't deserve it. For John, belonging doesn't begin by your actions. The belonging doesn't begin because you were good enough. Belonging begins when God shines upon you. He turns the system completely upside down. So that's how belonging begins for John. Next, we're going to see how John doesn't view belonging as a work in which you don't sin. He sees it as a journey from brokenness to wholeness. We're going to pick this up in chapter 2, verse 1. My little children, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. He is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. And by this we know that we have come to know him, that we keep his commandments. Whoever says, I know him, but does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected. Everybody say perfected. Yes. By this we know that we are in him. Whoever abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. Go back to the slide that has the word perfected in it. I think for us, the word perfect means something. And for the Greeks, the word perfect meant something else. Have you ever done this where you were talking and you thought you were saying the same thing and you thought that you were sending the right message, but the other person was like, I have no idea what you're talking about? Oftentimes we have this with the Bible. And what's happening here is that our definition of perfection is primarily moral perfection. When you think of somebody who is perfect, who do you picture in your mind? What are they like? They do good things. They don't do bad things. They probably take care of the poor. They're super kind. They're humble. When you think of somebody who is perfect, we see somebody who is morally good. Now, in the Greek, it does have a moral air to it, like a moral flavor, but it means something a little bit different. In the Greek, perfected means finished. Perfected means whole. Perfected means that there's nothing missing. And so for John, when he's talking about who belongs and what they look like, he says that in them, the love of God is perfected. That's the finished work. Perfection, wholeness. Now, we're not there yet. And he just kind of said that we're not there yet. Like he said, if anybody does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. He's not expecting us to be perfect. He's not expecting wholeness, but he's saying that this is the spectrum that we're on. We're moving from brokenness, from something missing, from having something that means that you're not accepted, like maybe a birthmark on your face, or maybe that you were overweight when you were little, or maybe you're just not good enough at your job like everybody else is, or maybe everybody in your small group has a great marriage and you're kind of struggling. It's not based upon that. For John, it's based upon whether or not you're on this journey from brokenness to wholeness. I don't know. I think that this is like a whole sermon series. Like, we could talk about how you move out of brokenness and into wholeness, for like 8 weeks. So I was trying to figure out, like, what is the one thing that I can say about this? And this is where I landed. If we're on a journey from brokenness to wholeness, then what that necessarily requires is patience. It requires patience with others. Because when they do something wrong, when they mess up, when they hurt you, what we as Christians, we see them and we have patience with them. We know that they're in process. They haven't arrived yet. Maybe you've heard the phrase, broken people break people, or hurting people hurt people. When you're moving from brokenness to wholeness, and when somebody in your life is moving from brokenness to wholeness, that means they're going to make mistakes. That means that they're walking in the light, and you may see the cracks in their life, and you may see the gaps in their life, and you may see all the ways in which they're not whole yet. But we know that they're moving towards wholeness. And so that gives us a patience with them. Whereas the world would say, you're sinning, you're out. Christianity looks at people who are on this journey and has patience with them and says, I love you, man. I'm glad you're here. It requires patience with other people, but it also requires patience with yourself. If you have lived in the world system for an extended period of time, what you begin to learn, the strategy that your mind begins to take is, if I need to be good, because if I'm bad, I'm going to get kicked out. I need to be good, if I'm bad, I'm going to get kicked out. And it produces this anxiety about how to be good. And sometimes when we're moving from the world system into the Christian system, and we're trying to see that that we're on this journey, instead of just taking the snapshot in our life and saying that was sinful, therefore everything is sinful. Something that you have to do is realize that you're in process, and you have to have patience with yourself. Here's the thing: God set up this system to work the way that it works. Do you ever wonder, why doesn't God just perfect us right away? And the answer is because he has patience. For him, it's okay that you're moving from brokenness to wholeness. And if God can extend you that patience, then I think that we need to ask ourselves why it's so hard to extend that patience to ourselves as well. It's about moving from brokenness to wholeness. Now, one more thing about this whole thing. Remember, for John, belonging begins when God shines his light upon you. For John, it's not about living up to a standard. It's not about not sinning. It's about being on this journey from brokenness to wholeness. What you also need to realize is that God radically accepts you. Can you radically accept that God accepts you? Can you have the same patience with yourself that God gives to you? Can you have the same patience and acceptance of others that God extends to them? And that's what it means to be in the system. And when you've lived in that system for a little while, what that produces is love. It produces love. John continues in verse 7. He says this, "Beloved, I am writing you no new commandment, but an old commandment that you've had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing you, which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining." Do you see that process again? The darkness is passing away, the true light is shining. "Whoever says that he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes." I think that's amazing. What John is saying is that the product of living in the system of belonging is love, not hate. It's acceptance, not shame. For John, when you don't have to live up to, when you don't have to make the leader like you, when you don't have to focus so much on just not sinning and have this anxious, tired spirituality, all of a sudden you're free. You're free to love. And here's what frees you. When somebody else sins against you, or when somebody else does something wrong, you know that you're in process just like they are, that you're on a journey just like they are, and that frees you. It frees you to love them instead of judge them. It frees you to accept them instead of kick them out. And here's why, because when you mess up, you know that you need that same grace, that you need that same love. The system is one that produces love. You don't have to shame other people to make sure that you're on the inside. You're already on the inside. It happened because God shined upon you. And so you can then extend love to other people. I want to say something about hate here. John says, "But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness, and walks in darkness, and does not know where he is going, because darkness has blinded his eyes." I was sitting in my office this week, and I was just kind of studying this passage and stuff, and I read that verse, and I thought, this is a really great verse. It's a really great verse because I don't hate anybody. This is so encouraging. I am the most loving person that I know. If it was up to me, we'd all be holding hands and frolicking in a meadow somewhere. If I was in the 60s, I totally would have been a hippie. Anyway, I don't hate anybody. But then I thought, that can't be true. There is no way that I've reached perfection in this area. So I was like, okay, this hate, here's what I want to know. How much do you have to dislike somebody before it becomes hate? What's the line in there? I want to know that line so I can walk right up to it. You know what I mean? But what is that? What's the bar for hatred? So I was like, okay, I got to look this up in the Greek. So I go and I look it up in the Greek, and I see that the Greek word, you know what it means? It means hate. That is not helpful. I'm like, what does that mean? And so I was like, okay, if everybody thinks that this Greek word is a good translation for hate, then let's look up what hate means so that we can understand what the common definition of hate is. So how many people, just before we do this, how many people would say that you actively hate somebody right now? Anybody? Anybody? Thank you for being honest. Let me ask you this question. How many of you, strongly dislike somebody? Anybody? Come on. Yeah. How many of you, a little stronger, passionately dislike somebody? Anybody? That's right. Okay, I asked Google, what does hate mean? Can we put that up there? Feel intense or passionate dislike for someone. Did anybody else think that the bar for hatred was higher? Did anybody else think oh man, I definitely don't hate anybody because hate means something other than what I'm feeling for this person. I think that feeling intense or passionate dislike for somebody is, we've all been there. I mean, I'm in there when I'm in line for Taco Bell. I'm like, what are they doing in there? It's been 15 minutes. I need that burrito. I feel a passionate dislike for somebody when they cut me off in traffic. Are you kidding me? Did you not see me right here? Do you have that much disrespect for me that and then you have this passionate dislike for somebody. I think that the bar for hatred is way lower than we think. One of the things that, one of the biggest things that I learned about communicating, about speaking, is that it does not matter what I say, it matters what you as an audience hear. I can tell you the truth in these super lofty theological technical terms, and I would be speaking 100% the truth. But if you didn't know what those terms meant, you wouldn't hear the message. And so why does it matter? Why even say it like that? It doesn't matter what I say, it matters what you hear. I've been to ask myself this week, if I think that I'm loving, I think that I love everybody. But does everybody think that I love them? It's one question to ask yourself, do I hate anybody? It's an entirely different question to ask yourself, does anybody think that I hate them? Because here's the thing, our messaging, whether it's tone, body language, the word choice, how you structured the sentences, your message, there is a message that is being sent across. And let's all be honest, none of us knew what hate was until this morning, right? So is it possible that we're sending a message to somebody that we don't want them to receive? Let's be honest, hate and judgmental criticism doesn't belong to the church anymore, it belongs to Facebook, right? Everybody on agreement there? Like, we don't own that. They own it now, thank God. If we applied that sort of rubric, like, it doesn't matter how I say something on Facebook. It matters what they hear. It doesn't matter if I speak truth on Facebook. It matters what they heard. I wonder if the bar for hatred, that we've moved it up so high that we don't think that anything we say is hateful. And for John, this is kind of amazing. When you hate, he says this, whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness. Have you ever been up like late at night, like looking for a brownie? Making a lot of fat kid jokes here. Anyway, like, have you ever been up late at night, like stumbling around and you like stubbed your toe on something because it was dark, all the lights were off? What happens when you're walking in the dark? He doesn't, as John continues, and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. Now, John here, when he says that the darkness has blinded his eyes, he's quoting Jesus and agreeing with Paul. Here's what I mean by that. Jesus said very often, he actually says this about greed. He says, look out unless greed gets you. Look out for greed because it'll get you. What he's saying there is greed is hard to recognize. It's hard to see. For John, what he's saying is when you hate, you can't even see that you're hating because you're in the darkness. You don't know where you're going. And he agrees with Paul because Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, this is the love chapter, Paul starts off that chapter by saying this, that even if he has the gift of prophecy, even if he has a faith that can move mountains, even if he has all wisdom and insight and can understand all the mysteries of the scriptures, read that as if he has all the scriptures memorized, knows all the theological things, can quote scripture to people who are wrong, can argue with non-Christians, read that. Even if I have all of those things and I don't have love, he says, I am nothing. And so what John is saying is this, that we can look like we're walking in the light, that we can quote the scripture, that we can say the right thing at the right time, that we can give money, that we can serve the poor. But if you don't do it with love, it's nothing. And the problem is that you probably won't even see it. Here's the number one way to know what your blind spot is. Ask somebody you live with. Yay! Who's going to do that? Nobody, that's the answer. If you really want to know, if I'm walking in the light or if I'm being blinded by darkness, ask somebody close to you. Hey, when I speak this way, do you feel that as love? Do you receive, do you hear love? Or do you hear hatred? Maybe, what if you asked your kids that? Like, hey, when we're talking about how you did this wrong, is the way that I'm talking about this, do you feel like I hate you or do you feel like I love you? Maybe ask your spouse, hey, when I'm bringing up how you hurt me or when I'm talking about something that we need to do you hear that as hate or do you hear that as love? John says that if you are radically accepted, if you are in process, if you're on the journey from brokenness to wholeness, then what that naturally produces is love. So, may you radically accept that you are radically accepted. May you have patience upon yourself and upon other people. And may your life be lived in love. Let's pray.